Hello and welcome to Forgotten Cello Music. At long last, this is episode 84. I have been working, maybe not so hard, but I have been at work anyway. I've been doing Bréval's 6 sonatas from his opus 40. If anybody knows Suzuki, take a look at Suzuki Volume 4. In it, there is placed both movements of his Sonata number 1 from opus 40 in C major, both the Allegro and the Rondo. A little quote: his cello pieces were formerly much in request, but have long been obsolete. What? I guess it is kind of true, but I kind of hope to reverse that a little bit because I have discovered quite a treasure trove of learning material. It's a great place to cut your teeth and to learn and delve a little more into technique. Jean-Baptiste Bréval, 1753 to 1823. This episode is entirely dedicated to his 6 sonatas, opus 40. These are solidly in the lower intermediate level. Let's go over the keys of the sonatas and the forms. Number 1, in C major. First movement, Allegro. Second movement, Rondo. And it is a Grazioso tempo. Number 2 is in F major. First movement, Allegro. Second movement, just Rondo. The third sonata in G major. First movement, Allegro. Second movement, Rondo, Grazioso. Fourth sonata in B flat major. First movement, Allegro. Second movement, aria, andantino. This is a theme with 2 variations. Fifth sonata in A major. First movement, Allegro. Second movement, tempo di minuetto. And finally, the 6th sonata in D major. First movement, Allegro. Second movement, Rondo. I have been working on this set of 6 sonatas. There is no real fair copy of this online that I know of, not of all 6 sonatas. I'm super thankful that there is a copy at all of this opus, of all 6 sonatas. It's in a really old type of printing, kind of handwritten style almost. Very colored. Not really sure when the publication was, but it was a long time ago. And I have made my own fair copies, which I'm going to be placing on my Patreon, and they will be for sale if you're interested in a very fair copy. They will be not sold for all that much. I don't even know the price yet, but you can go and check it out. I promise you it will not be exorbitant. None of my downloadable PDFs are exorbitantly priced as far as I'm concerned, but let me know if you think they are. A little bit about Bréval. Born 1753, died 1823. He was a French cellist and composer, wrote mostly for the cello. He also wrote a method for cello. In the method, he does write little snippets. He's got a preface in there. And from page 140 in the second etude, he writes, "In the lessons which follow, the fingerings are typically indicated when shifting. But their multiplicity always causes worry and makes the student lazy. It is better for the student to determine their own fingerings through trial and error, so to speak. In this way, the student gains confidence and the execution becomes faster and more consistent." That was translated by Kyle Degan, who so generously shared his translation with me. We have a wonderful correspondence on my Patreon, and it is just great to be able to see what other people are doing and hear a little bit from them. So thank you, Kyle, for that. Now from Vasilevsky's tome, The Violoncello and Its History, he writes a short, succinct bio. He was Cupid's pupil, born in 1756, that's what he says, but all modern sources indicate 1753, in the place of Ain, and quickly developed his talent, so much so that he was able to very early appear at the Concert Spirituel with brilliant success. He was a member of the Paris Opera Orchestra from 1781 to 1806. In 1796 followed his nomination as teacher of violoncello playing at the Conservatoire. He was released from that in 1802, as the number of pupils at the institution was not large enough to keep him employed. Man, the problems persist to this day. Oh, never enough cellists. Now, towards the end of his life, Bréval retired to Chamouille, a village in the neighborhood of Laon. He shortly thereafter died at the end of the year 1825. Most sources indicate 1823 nowadays. Bréval published for the violoncello 7 concertos, 5 sets of duets, 3 sets of sonatas with bass, and 12 airs variés. Besides these, he wrote 2 concertantes, quartets, trios, and an instruction book under the title Méthode raisonnée de violoncelle, which appeared in Paris in 1804. His cello pieces were formerly much in request, but have long been obsolete. As a player, Bréval had a finished style, but in his rendering lacked force and energy. So, the quote from the beginning was from Vasilevsky, and it's interesting that despite the efforts of Suzuki to insert a wonderful example of his writing for students, I guess for some reason or another, the other 5 sonatas just never took off. I'm going to be playing snippets, which you've already heard several of, and they will all be in chronological order, or the order he wrote them in, 1 through 6. So at the beginning, you will hear his most famous, well-known number 1 in C major, and throughout, you'll hear 2, 3, 4, 5, and finally at the end, number 6. Probably not in their entirety, as my cello sounds rather disgusting right now, and my playing is less than polished, but I recorded them nonetheless. Now, Bréval, the teacher. You could hear from the citation of the violoncello and its history that he wrote a cello method, and in it, by looking at other methods, you can see that he is one of the first to attempt to make the skill levels increase in difficulty more gradually. As Bréval put it, the small number of those methods that exist seem to me not to contain enough elementary principles and seem to take large leaps rather than proceed step by step. This is taken from the introduction of the method, which is originally in French and has been, this English translation has generously been supplied, as I already mentioned, by Kyle DeGan. And again, thank you very much. It's wonderful to have that translation. All you have to do is look through his method and you can see that he accomplished his goal. It's a very lengthy method, and it does take quite a while to work up to a certain difficulty. Now, on to the main subject, the cello sonatas in sets of 6. As it was already mentioned in Vasilevsky that he wrote 3 sets of 6 sonatas each, I'd like to just go over them just based on observation and a cursory playthrough of the 2nd and 3rd set of these sonatas. Bréval composed these 3 sets of cello sonatas. The majority of them have 2 movements, especially the early set, the first easiest set, and the second slightly more difficult set. They were all written for 2 cellos, or as they put it, a cello and a bass. At any rate, the second cello or the second part is written in bass clef. These sets of sonatas seem to follow a similar idea that Bréval set out to achieve in his method, and that is to gradually increase the difficulty, which I think he does pretty well. By all accounts of my experience, the levels of ability are as follows. The first set, it's the easiest, and it's for lower intermediate, written entirely in bass clef, and really you don't go above 4th position. Occasionally there is a harmonic A, which could be considered 5th position, but oftentimes we don't even think of that as a position higher than 4th, or at least none of my teachers ever mentioned it. The second set of sonatas, it's the middle set and is for intermediate, and it is written mostly in tenor clef. The third, and you go up into 7th, I think, 7th position, maybe a little 8th, but definitely 7th. Hardest, the third set is the hardest and is for upper intermediate for sure, if not advanced, and is written in the treble clef, but is meant to be played an octave lower as per the custom. The forms of these sonatas, all 6 of these sonatas from the easiest set, which is the main topic today, have first movements in the sonata allegro form, which basically means that you've got an exposition, a development, and a recapitulation, and sometimes with a short coda. The second movements are often in rondo form, but there is one sonata that has a theme and variations, and one sonata that has a minuet. In this easiest set of sonatas, the early intermediate level, these are certainly the easiest of the 3 sets. As mentioned, it's all in bass clef. You go up to about 5th. The highest, I think, is 5th position with harmonic A. It requires a technical skill, both of speed and agility. You really need to have your fingers develop to a fast speed, and with really precise coordination with your bow. Lots of string crossings that happen quickly. I think the challenges for most students, as now that I've taught the Suzuki edited version of Sonata in C major, first and second movements, I think the challenges are the fast tempos. There are rapid notes. Even if you don't take it all that fast, there are very rapid notes, passages of, that is. Some ornaments. Ornaments are always a little bit funny, I find. But if you prepare the student right, they go pretty well. I think you need a bit of a lighter, more elegant bow to be able to play these well. It is early classical, late Baroque, early classical after all. And then this juxtaposition of duplets and triplets. He does it in almost every sonata, and it is a big deal, especially for students who are not counting. And I think we all know students, probably including ourselves at that stage, that did not count. So we need to be aware of that juxtaposition. I think in general, the character is elegant. It's light. What do I mean by elegant? It's student music, but it still you still need to strive for some sort of gracefulness, some elegance. classical era music has it. I think it's all there. Mozart, Haydn, Boccherini think sort of in that vein. I mean, it's fast music in general, but at the same time, it should never feel like you are hurried or that you're pressed to play the notes, which is why I think it's one of the hardest things to play well. It's got to have some sort of refined nature to it to be effective. Now that I've been through all 6 sonatas from this earliest set, or should I say from the easiest set, you can sense that Bréval frequently utilizes certain figures. I mean, he reuses certain motives or figures, but there's also a certain freshness because of the context in which he puts them, and oftentimes the way that he varies them. It's not always exactly the same use of that figure, but you can kind of get the general feel that, oh, I think I've heard that before. I think I've played that before. The sonata allegro form often begins with longer notes that are much more lyrical, but then very rapidly gives way, especially in the development, this is pretty normal anyway, to faster note values, lasting until the end of the phrase. And then in the rondo, lots of grace notes. It has a lighter feel, as many rondos do, which are also more playful in character. And I think that he does a really nice job of contrasting with these two forms. It really complement each other well. When I was making notes, I actually wasn't really sure what I wanted to say. I just kind of felt lost after entering all the notes and then making the recordings. I knew I wanted to make an episode about these for probably about 2 years now. And I just always felt kind of lost. I ended up writing a section called What I Learned, or what I learned from playing all 6 sonatas. Maybe it's a good idea, so you can understand why I am thinking this way, that even from when I was a student, I don't know what it is, but I have a generally pleasant memory of the sonata in C major. That can't be said for a lot of pieces back in those days, because I seem to be kind of a Sturm und Drang kind of person. But anyway, I do feel, or I do remember feeling like this was an exciting moment somehow. And I think it has to do with the fact that it was the first long form, like real piece that I got acquainted with. Because I don't recall my teacher ever giving me any kind of supplementary material until probably book 5. I could be wrong, but I don't recall anything from those days as far as things outside of Suzuki. Maybe a few etudes, but no other pieces that I can recall. I mean, it was the first piece that had 2 full movements, and it was written for cello. I think it gave me a lot to look forward to. As I've already said, there were ornaments, rapid notes, the dealings with triplets and duplets. You had to plan out this long line to make it sound elegant. You had to connect the sections together. I mean, I'm talking about form, which I had no clue about in those days. So sonata, allegro form, rondo form. It just was, in general, I think a good experience for my learning. Although I don't really remember any details from it, just felt I have the general sense that it was a good experience. What I took away in the present day is that these 6 sonatas is a great study in style. I think if students were to learn more than that C major sonata at some point, even if it was only one other sonata, or if the teacher used the other sonatas as reading material. Let's not even think about the fact that students don't practice all that much, and time is precious and all that stuff. But if in a perfect world you could present these other pieces and students did practice a lot, this would be a great moment in the learning career to find out about sonatas and really come to grips with a sonata before you were thrown into the deep end. And I've said this from the beginning of the podcast, that I feel like we are thrown, or at least a lot of us that grew up in the 80s and 90s, we were kind of thrown into the sonata and without really understanding what was going on. And it just seems to me that playing more than one of these Bréval sonatas would just be fantastic learning material. The student doesn't have to really understand what's going on, but the teacher could mention things like, oh, this is in sonata allegro form. Here's the exposition where you hear all the material which the rest of the sonata is built on. And it's fairly lengthy. Pretty exciting stuff. It just lets the classical style sink in before you get to something more challenging. Vivaldi, of course, is Baroque style with the Sonata da Chiesa or Sonata da Camera. But you do get that sense of form built into you. What else? It could be, well, I've already mentioned this basically, but for the motivated and diligent student, you really could develop the powers of focus just to be able to get through all of that material. And all by all, I mean, I'm talking like 2 sonatas, maybe 3. In a perfect world, obviously, all 6 would be just awesome. Can you imagine what could be gleaned from a study of all 6 sonatas? I think sight reading could also be an exercise that could be employed with these sonatas. So I'm purely speaking of sight reading, not learning how to play each one well. I mean, sight reading is something that we need to develop. It's a real skill, and even if you just read through them one time, I think you could glean something already. Another observation is that the amount of variation on similar motives and figures, patterns, sequences, I think it's a really good indication of how good he was at composition for the student. He really gave the student a lot to develop their skills with. I think probably at first you get the sense that it's mostly the same stuff in different keys, But once you give it a chance and you play through it probably a couple of times, and by the way, sight reading does not mean just one time if you don't want it to be. It could be 3 or 4 times. It's still sight reading, no matter which way you put it. It's not sight reading if you've practiced it for a week. Anyway, going on, there are figures that twist around, and they aren't really repeated in any other sonata. Not note for note or rhythm for rhythm, but close, really close. I have to be honest, I was a bit taken aback by some of them, as in, I was surprised, and my fingers got twisted up fairly easily in some of these because they were just not expected to do what they were doing. But it was fantastic practice for me. I think I improved somewhat because of playing these and recording these 6 sonatas. Now, as far as recording, what did I take away from learning these and recording them? Well, yeah, these 6 sonatas are not that simple. And as students, you do have to work for it. And what else? I think the notes themselves are not that easy to learn. It does take effort to learn the notes and to play them well. Each sonata is a little world of teaching material, or even each little section in a sonata is teaching material. There's just all kinds of skills needed, technique. You need to be on your counting game. You cannot look at one note at a time. You really need to take into account what's being presented ahead of time. Well, if you liked this set of sonatas, be sure and find me on social media, YouTube, Traveling Cello, Instagram, Traveling Cello, Patreon, Traveling Cello, and of course, you can send me a message on any of those. And if you feel like you want to support what I'm doing, send me something at PayPal, and it is paypal.me/travelingcello. And then, of course, on Patreon, you can sign up to be a member, or you can purchase some of my PDFs. Thanks for sticking with me, and I hope that I can get out another episode in the next month, but it will probably have something to do with Gultermann, as I am back at learning some new Gultermann pieces. I hope you will have a great day, and remember to